My daughter told me not to come for Christmas. Mom's husband will be there, she said. We're trying to make him feel like family. So I spent Christmas Eve my own way. But just after midnight, my daughter called. Her voice was shaking. Dad, why are you on the news? The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days before Christmas Eve, while I was sitting in the cab of my truck waiting on a lumber delivery. The heater was running warm over my boots, and the sky outside had that flat, wet cement look that means more cold is coming. My phone buzzed on the dash, and my daughter's face lit up the screen. Hey, kiddo, I said. I picked up that smoked ham you like, getting ready for Christmas Eve. There was a pause. I could hear windshield wipers scraping somewhere on her end. Dad, she said, and her voice was flat in a way I didn't like. About Christmas Eve. I think we need to change the plan. Change it how? We always do the ham on Christmas Eve, just you and me. Then you head to your mom's on Christmas Day. We've done it that way since the divorce. I know, she said, but her husband bought tickets for everyone to the winter gala at the club on Christmas Eve, and then there's a big family dinner after. His kids are flying in. He's really trying to bring everyone together this year. So come to me first. We eat early, 5 o'clock. You head over after. Dad, no, she said, and now there was an edge in it. Mom's husband will be there, and we're trying to make him feel like family. It's important to her. Honestly, it'd just be awkward if you came, or if I had to split my time and leave early. I sat with that for a second, trying to make him feel like family. I'd spent 22 years being her actual father. None of that seemed to be currency anymore. Emily, I said, keeping my voice level, I already bought the food. I took 3 days off work. I haven't seen you since October. Dad, please don't do this, she said, and I could hear the irritation coming through now, plain as anything. It's one holiday. He went out of his way to plan all this. You can figure something else out this year. Figure it out. Like I was a scheduling conflict she needed to resolve before the caterer called back. The line went dead before I could answer. She hadn't said goodbye, just hung up. I sat there in the cab for a long 4 minutes, watching the gray sky. My name is Paul. I'm 52. I run a small drywall and framing outfit in the county, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to buy peace instead of demanding it. When my ex-wife left me 5 years ago for a man with a downtown office and a nicer car than mine, I didn't fight for anything. I let her take most of what we had because I didn't want Emily caught in the middle of a war. I kept paying her tuition. I kept my mouth shut while her stepfather bought her a new car and took her to Cabo. I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as having it. I was wrong about that. I'd just been funding my own erasure, one quiet concession at a time. I drove home that night to my house on Oak Lane and sat in the living room looking at the small artificial tree I'd put up in the corner, more out of habit than anything resembling cheer. The ham was already thawing in the fridge. I'd taken the days off. I had nowhere to be and no one who wanted me there. Instead of pushing harder or showing up uninvited, I did the only thing that felt like it still had some dignity attached to it. I called a man I barely knew, a volunteer coordinator named Walter, who ran a firewood program out of an old warehouse near the rail yard. I'd donated some scrap lumber to his outfit the year before, and he'd said to call if I ever wanted to help split logs for people who needed the heat more than I needed a quiet evening alone. It's Paul, I said when he picked up. The drywall guy. You still need hands out there? There was a pause and then a low chuckle. Every single night this time of year, Paul. You got somewhere better to be? Not anymore, I said. Come on down tomorrow evening then. Bring gloves. Some of the wood bank operated out of a cinder block building that used to be a rail depot storage shed, tucked behind a chain link fence with a hand-painted sign that just said firewood in faded red letters. When I pulled up the next evening, snow was just starting to spit down out of a sky gone the color of a bruise. Walter was out front, loading split rounds of ash into the bed of an old Chevy pickup that had seen at least 2 decades of winters. He was maybe 70, built like a man who'd worked outside his whole life, with hands that looked carved rather than grown. He caught me watching him favor one leg as he lifted around into the truck bed. Bad knee, he said before I could ask. 40 years on the roads for the county will do that to a man. Plows, salt trucks, dispatch toward the end when my back finally gave out too. Dispatch, I said, pulling my gloves on. So you were behind a desk at some point. Emergency services dispatch county-wide last 8 years before I retired, he said, hefting another round. You'd be amazed what crosses a dispatcher's desk in a county this size. Every 911 call, every utility outage report, every ambulance run gets logged and time-stamped somewhere, whether people remember that or not. Old habit. I still think in call logs. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a piece of a stranger's biography. I picked up a round of ash and tossed it into his truck bed, and we got to work. We didn't talk much for the first hour. I ran my chainsaw through downed limbs Walter had hauled in from a county clearing crew, and he stacked what I cut into neat rows destined for a widow 3 streets over who was down to her last few logs. The work was good. It asked something physical of me and gave back a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in days. When we finally broke, Walter pulled a battered green thermos out of his truck cab and poured me a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt earth and tar. It was hot though, and I drank it gratefully. You look like a man who just got uninvited from something, he said, looking out over the darkening lot. So I told him. The phone call, the ham thawing uselessly in my fridge, the words trying to make him feel like family landing on me like a slap I hadn't seen coming. Walter listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I expected to. A man goes where he's needed, Paul, he said finally, not where he's tolerated. My own boy passed 20 years back, and for a while while, I thought the world was done needing anything from me. Then I looked around and noticed how many people in this valley were freezing in the dark every winter, quietly, without anybody making a fuss about it. I've got a truck and a bad knee. You've got a truck and a strong back. That's a decent trade if you're willing to make it. I spent that evening and the next 2 splitting wood and loading deliveries with him, learning the rhythm of a life I hadn't known existed 3 streets over from people who'd never once crossed my mind. Mrs. Gable, down to her last logs, the Alvarez family, whose furnace had died in October and never gotten fixed, an elderly man named Frank, who lived alone since his wife passed. None of them knew my name yet. None of them needed to. I just showed up with a truck and gloves and did what needed doing, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to think about, that felt like enough. On the 3rd night, Walter caught the weather report on the radio and went quiet for a moment, listening to a forecaster describe a system moving down from the north with an unusual amount of moisture behind a cold front. He clicked the radio off. "That's not a snowstorm," he said. "That's an ice event stacked on top of a blizzard. County's not ready for that kind of 1-2 punch. Half our elderly folks are barely holding on as it is. What do? We do what we've been doing," he said. "Except we don't stop when it gets bad. We keep going when it gets bad. That's when it matters most." I thought about Emily's voice on the phone. Figure it out. I thought about the gala, the family dinner, the tickets bought for everyone but me, and then I thought about Mrs. Gable's last 3 logs and the temperature dropping into single digits by the weekend. "I'm in," I said. "Whatever it takes." Walter nodded once, like that settled something he'd been wondering about. 6 a.m. tomorrow, he said. "Bring the heavy chains." The storm hit exactly when the forecasters said it would, but nobody had braced for how bad it actually got. By Thursday morning, the snow was already knee-deep, and a thin glaze of ice had started forming on every surface that held still long enough. Wind gusts were clocking near 40 miles an hour, tearing branches off old oaks and snapping utility poles like they were made of balsa wood. By Friday afternoon, the county's power grid was buckling. Nearly 80% of the service area went dark within a 6-hour window. The temperature dropped to 4 degrees above zero and kept falling. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, plugged into its charger, screen dark. I pulled on my heaviest gear and loaded the truck bed with 2 portable generators from my shop, diesel, bottled water, and a dozen wool blankets I'd bought at a surplus store that morning on a hunch. For the better part of 2 days, the world shrank down to whatever my headlights could reach. Walter and I became, in effect, a 2-man emergency response unit operating in the gaps left by an overwhelmed county infrastructure. My truck had a steel plow bolted to the front and 4-wheel drive with new studded tires, which put us ahead of most of the county's own equipment, half of which was stuck in drifts on the main roads. The first call came from St. Jude's, a senior care facility off Elm Road, after their backup generator failed sometime around midnight Thursday. I hauled my largest generator through their side entrance, ran heavy-duty extension cords through a propped kitchen window, and got their heating fans and refrigeration units running again before the building's interior temperature could drop into dangerous territory. A nurse there, exhausted and grateful in a way that made my chest tight, told me they had 51 residents in that building, most of them fragile in ways that made a night without heat a genuine emergency rather than an inconvenience. We didn't stop to process any of it. We moved to the next thing. Fallen trees blocked Route 9 near the county line, and we spent an hour with chainsaws clearing a path wide enough for an ambulance to reach a woman in active labor whose driveway had been buried under a drift taller than my truck's hood. We delivered dry oak logs to a dozen households running on nothing but fireplace heat, families huddled together in single rooms to conserve warmth, kids wrapped in blankets watching us with wide, tired eyes. Walter didn't slow down despite his knee, and I didn't ask him to. Somewhere in the second day, I stopped thinking about the gala, the family dinner, the tickets bought for everyone but me. My mind had never felt clearer. I wasn't performing peace for anyone. I was just present in the work, moving from one urgent thing to the next, useful in a way that didn't require anyone's approval to be real. By Saturday, Christmas Eve, I was running on nothing but adrenaline and coffee. My face was chapped raw from the wind. My back ached from lifting generators and hauling chains, but I hadn't felt this steady in years. Around mid-morning, we got word through the volunteer network that a stretch of families out near the county's western edge had gone completely without contact since the outages began. Walter knew the area from his dispatch years and navigated us there through roads barely passable, snowdrifts reshaping the landscape into something unrecognizable. We found an elderly couple huddled in their kitchen with a single space heater running off a car battery jury-rigged through their garage. Their propane tank had run dry 2 days earlier, and they hadn't been able to reach anyone. I got a generator running for them within 20 minutes, enough to keep a space heater and their refrigerator going through what remained of the storm. The wife gripped my hand with fingers that felt like ice and wouldn't let go for a long moment. "We didn't think anyone was coming," she said. "We didn't think anyone knew we were out here." "We knew," Walter told her. "We always know. That's the whole point of what we do." I thought about that line for a long time afterward. We always know. There was something in it that felt like an answer to a question I hadn't fully known I was asking, about what it meant to actually matter to the people around you, versus simply being tolerated by them when convenient. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, with the worst of the storm supposedly behind us, Walter and I kept moving anyway. Somewhere out there, I knew, my daughter daughter was getting ready for a winter gala at a country club, dressed in something new her stepfather had probably bought her, preparing to spend the evening making a virtual stranger feel like family. I didn't feel angry about it anymore. I just felt far away from it, like watching a life I used to live from the wrong end of a telescope. Just before 11:30 that night, we came across a local news van stuck axle deep in a drift at the intersection of Maplewood and 10th. It had been trailing county emergency vehicles all evening trying to cover the outages, and now it was as stranded as everything else. Walter and I pulled up behind it, and I hooked a heavy tow strap to its frame without much thought, throwing my truck into low gear and pulling it free like it weighed nothing at all. A reporter came jogging over to my window, a young woman with a cameraman right behind her, the red light on top of the camera glowing bright against the falling snow. "We're live," she said, breathless, teeth chattering audibly. "I'm standing here with 2 local residents who've spent the last 2 days single-handedly clearing roads, delivering emergency power, and rescuing stranded families while our county infrastructure remains crippled. Sir, can I get your name? And what has you out here in these conditions on Christmas Eve?" I rolled the window down all the way. The cold hit my face clean and honest, nothing like the practiced warmth of a country club dining room. "My name is Paul," I said. "This is Walter. We're out here because there are people who need us. A man's supposed to go where he's needed. When it gets cold like this, you don't just stay inside looking after yourself. You show up for the people who don't have anybody else." She looked genuinely moved by that. "Paul, the emergency broadcast center just confirmed you and Walter saved St. Jude's care facility 2 nights ago. 51 seniors would have had to be evacuated in sub-zero temperatures if you hadn't gotten that generator running. Do you have family waiting for you at home tonight?" I let out a short breath that turned to mist in the cold air. "My family had other plans this year," I said. "They had a dinner to attend, so I had some free time on my hands. Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Stay warm." I rolled the window back up before she could ask anything else, shifted into drive, and dropped the plow blade back onto the road. Walter and I still had 2 more houses to check before we could call it a night, and neither of us gave the interview a second thought as we pulled away. We finished our rounds a little after midnight. Walter's knee was clearly done for the day by the time we got back to the wood bank to park the equipment, and I dropped him off at his small house on South Maple Street. He shook my hand before he got out, his grip firmer than I expected. "You did good work tonight, Paul," he said. "Go home, sleep." My own house on Oak Lane was freezing when I walked in a little before 1 in the morning, but the power had just flickered back on, the furnace kicking to life somewhere in the basement with a groan I'd never been so glad to hear. I stripped off my wet boots and jacket by the door and left them there, and walked into the kitchen to find my phone exactly where I'd left it, screen dark against the counter. I picked it up, and the screen lit up all at once. 38 missed calls. 24 from Emily, 12 from her mother, 2 from a number I didn't recognize that I'd later learn belonged to her stepfather's personal cell. Beneath that, dozens of unread text messages. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the wood cold against my jeans even with the heat coming back on, and hadn't even opened the first message before the phone buzzed again, Emily's name lighting up the screen. I slid my thumb across the screen and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, Emily. Dad." Her voice came through the speaker, shaking in a way I hadn't heard since she was small. Nothing like the flat, irritated tone from 4 days earlier. "Oh my God, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm in my kitchen, Emily," I said, keeping my voice level. "Just got in." "Dad, why are you on the news?" I could hear muffled shouting behind her, her mother's voice pitched high and frantic, and a man's voice underneath it, uncharacteristically loud. "We were sitting in the living room," she said. "The power came back on maybe 20 minutes ago, and he turned on the TV to check the weather, and you were right there on the screen. The anchor called you the Christmas Eve Guardian. Dad, the governor's office put out a statement thanking you and Walter by name." "Walter's a good man," I said. "We were just clearing roads." "But Dad, you told the reporter you had free time because your family had other plans," she said, and her voice caught like she was on the edge of crying. "Do you have any idea how that sounds? His phone's been ringing non-stop for 10 minutes. People from the club, his business partners, they're asking why his stepdaughter's own father was out clearing snow with a chainsaw while we were at a party. They're saying it looks like we abandoned you to freeze." I looked out the kitchen window at the snow still drifting against my fence line, and something in me settled into place, clean and sharp. She wasn't asking whether I was safe. She hadn't spent 1 second wondering whether I'd survived 48 hours in a blizzard that had frozen pipes and buckled the power grid across most of the county. She was worried about how the optics played out to people at a country club. "Emily," I said, and my voice didn't need to rise to make the point. "I didn't say you abandoned me. I told the exact truth. You told me not to come because his family was there, and you wanted him to feel like family. You told me to figure it out, so I figured it out. You didn't have to say it on television," she said, and now she really was crying. "Then tell them the truth if it bothers you that much," I said. "Tell them you chose to spend your Christmas Eve with the man who bought you a car, and I chose to spend mine with people who actually needed their heat turned back on. There's no lie anywhere in that." "Dad, please," she said, and for the first time all night, I heard something underneath the irritation that might have been real fear. "His generator failed 2 hours after the storm hit. The pipes in the basement burst about an hour ago. The whole lower level is flooded and it's freezing in here. We've been huddled around the gas fireplace all night. He won't let the neighbors in because he doesn't doesn't want anyone seeing the mess, and he's furious. Can you bring one of your generators over? Maybe the plow too? The driveway's blocked by a drift and we can't get a car out. I sat there in my quiet kitchen for a long moment. 5 years ago, even 4 days ago, I would have been in my truck before she finished the sentence, hooked up a generator, cleared the driveway, tried to be the hero one more time just to earn some small crumb of her approval. But that man had died somewhere out on Route 9 lifting an 80-pound log out of an ambulance's path, or maybe in Walter's cinderblock shed drinking burnt coffee out of a dented thermos. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where he'd gone. I only knew he wasn't answering this phone anymore. No, Emily, I said. I can't do that. What? Why? Her voice climbed, disbelieving. Dad, we're freezing in here. You have the equipment right there. My equipment belongs to the wood bank tonight, I said. And your stepfather's a very wealthy man. Senior partner at an investment firm, drives a car nicer than mine ever was. I'm sure he can figure it out. That's what you told me to do, isn't it? How can you be so cruel? It's Christmas. It is, I said. And I spent it making sure 51 elderly people in a care facility didn't freeze to death in their beds. I went where I was needed tonight. I am not needed at his house, Emily. I'm only convenient there when the power goes out. There's a real difference between those two things, and it took me 52 years to finally learn it. So you're just going to leave us here? He's your family now, I said. You spent the last 3 years making sure of that. Let him take care of you. I'm going to bed. I didn't wait for her to answer. I pressed the red circle on the screen, ending the call, and then I turned the phone off completely, set it face down on the counter, and walked into my bedroom without turning on another light. The sun came up on Christmas morning bright and blindingly white against fresh snow. The sky scrubbed down to a hard, clean blue that only shows up after a storm has hauled all the haze out of the air. I made a full pot of real coffee, not Walter's burnt tar, and sat by the kitchen window for a long time before I turned my phone back on. There were more messages waiting, most of them from Emily's mother, calling me selfish, cold, vindictive, a list of adjectives I let wash past without much feeling attached to them. One long, rambling message from Emily herself, half apology and half justification for why she'd needed to stay at her stepfather's house, why the optics mattered so much to her, why I should understand. I didn't reply to any of it. I didn't feel angry. I felt strangely spacious, like a room that had finally been cleared of furniture nobody used anymore. I made myself breakfast, ate it slowly at the kitchen table, and thought about the last 4 days in a way I hadn't let myself do while I was still moving through them. The phone call in the truck, the wood bank, the 2 days of non-stop work that had left my hands raw and my back aching in a way that somehow felt honest rather than punishing. The reporter's microphone in the falling snow, my daughter's voice, shaking, asking why I was on the news, and then asking for something entirely different once she understood what the broadcast had cost her stepfather socially. Around 10 o'clock, I drove down to South Maple Street with a plate of the smoked ham I'd bought a week earlier, back when I still thought I'd be sharing it with my daughter. I found Walter out on his porch in an old folding chair, a wool blanket over his lap, watching sunlight hit the snow. Thought you might want some real breakfast, I said, setting the plate down on the small table beside him. He looked at the ham, then up at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The Christmas Eve Guardian brings ham. Must be doing something right. Don't start, I said, and sat down on the top step, letting the cold morning air settle over me. We didn't talk much at first, just watched smoke curl up from a chimney down the block. Eventually, Walter asked, in the mild, unhurried way he seemed to ask everything, how the call with my daughter had gone. I told him. The generator, the flooded basement, my refusal, the way she'd accused me of cruelty for declining to bail out a man who could afford to buy his way out of most problems in his life. Walter was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee mug slowly in his hands. You know, he said, dispatch logs everything, every outage call, every utility complaint, every emergency line that gets dialed in a county this size. Old habit of mine, still checking the overnight logs some mornings even though I'm retired. Force of routine, I suppose. Why bring that up? No particular reason, he said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Just an old dispatcher's curiosity. A basement flooding from a burst pipe during a hard freeze. That's common enough this time of year. Nothing unusual there. But a generator failure at a house that size, in a neighborhood like Fairview Heights, usually gets a service call logged pretty quick. People with that kind of money don't sit around in the cold for long. They call someone. I hadn't thought about it that way. You're saying there'd be a record. I'm saying there's always a record of something, Walter said. Doesn't mean it tells you what you think it's going to tell you. Just means it's there if you ever go looking. I sat with that for a while, watching the smoke rise down the block, not entirely sure why it was bothering me the way it was. Emily's voice on the phone had sounded genuinely frightened in the moment. The pipes bursting, the basement flooding, the whole household huddled around a single gas fireplace. I hadn't doubted any of it at the time. I still didn't have a clear reason to doubt it now, but something about the specificity of Walter's comment, a service call usually gets logged pretty quick, sat in the back of my mind the way a splinter does before you've noticed exactly where it went in. I found myself turning it over for the rest of that morning. Even as I tried to focus on other things, it wasn't that I wanted to catch her in something. If anything, some old, stubborn part of me wanted the opposite, wanted to confirm that the flood had been real, and that my refusal to help had been the only thing that had gone wrong that night. A single hard decision I could stand behind without complication. A version of the story where I'd simply chosen the wood bank over my daughter, and that choice was was the whole of it. I spent the rest of Christmas Day quietly. I didn't call Emily back. I didn't call her mother. I went back to the wood bank in the afternoon and helped Walter deliver the last of the holiday firewood to the elderly couple we'd rescued out on the county's western edge, and to Frank, whose hot meal I brought myself this time, a plate of ham and the kind of mashed potatoes my own mother used to make. Frank asked me, over that meal, whether I had family checking in on me for the holiday. I told him I had a daughter and left it at that. He didn't push, which I was grateful for. Some men know when a question has already been answered by the silence around it. It was 2 days later, the day after Christmas, when the thought resurfaced in a way I couldn't quite set aside anymore. I was at Walter's kitchen table, drinking coffee, watching him scroll through something on an old laptop he still used out of habit more than necessity. "You still have access to those logs?" I asked, half joking. Walter glanced up at me over the rim of his glasses. "Public utility outage records are public record, Paul. Anybody can request them from the county. Emergency dispatch logs, that's a little more restricted, but outage data, storm damage claims, insurance filings tied to a declared emergency, all of that's searchable if you know where to look and you're patient enough to look." "Why would I want to look at any of that?" He shrugged, an easy, unhurried motion. "I didn't say you would. I said it was there. Man asked me a question yesterday about whether there'd be a record of something. Sometimes a man just wants to know the truth of a thing, even after he's already made his peace with it. Nothing wrong with that." I sat with that for a long moment, my coffee going lukewarm in front of me. Some part of me argued that whatever I found wouldn't change anything that had already happened. The refusal was made. The words were said. Digging into records now would only be for my own satisfaction, a way of confirming a story I'd already decided to live with either way. But another part of me, quieter and more persistent, wanted to know. Not to win an argument with Emily, just to know plainly what had actually happened in that house while I was out in the cold pulling a generator through a stranger's kitchen window. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I asked him to show me how. Walter walked me through the county's public records portal on his kitchen table laptop, an interface that looked like it hadn't been redesigned since sometime in the previous decade, all cramped drop-down menus and a search bar that timed out twice before it finally returned results. Storm-related outage reports, insurance claims tied to the declared state of emergency, utility service calls, all of it filterable by date and by zip code if you were patient enough to wade through the formatting. "Start broad," Walter said, pulling a kitchen chair up beside me. "Zip code first, then narrow by date. You'll get a lot of noise before you get anything useful. That's just how these systems are built. Nobody in county IT has touched this portal since I was still working." I searched the zip code for Fairview Heights first, the neighborhood where Emily's mother and her husband lived, filtering for the 48 hours spanning Christmas Eve into Christmas Day. A handful of results came back. Downed limb removal requests, 2 burst pipe insurance claims from addresses 3 streets over from theirs, a generator service call logged just after midnight from a house 2 doors down, nothing from their address at all. I sat looking at the empty result for longer than made sense, the cursor blinking in the search field like it was waiting for me to try again and get a different answer. I refined the search, widened the date range by a day in each direction, checked for a possible address typo, tried the alternate spelling of the street name in case the county system had it logged wrong. Nothing changed. If a pipe had burst in that basement, if a generator had genuinely failed during the coldest stretch of the storm, there was no record of anyone in that household having called it in, filed a claim, or requested service, despite them having exactly the kind of homeowner's policy that would have made filing trivially easy and financially sensible. "Doesn't mean nothing happened," Walter said, watching over my shoulder. "Some folks don't bother filing right away. Insurance companies see a spike in claims weeks after a storm sometimes, people finally getting around to the paperwork once the adrenaline wears off." "Weeks," I said. "Not never, not never," he agreed. We sat with that for a while, the laptop screen casting a pale light across his kitchen table. I found myself running the search a third time, adjusting filters that didn't need adjusting, the way a man does when he's not really looking for new information so much as trying to talk himself out of the information he already has. Walter didn't rush me. He got up, refilled both our coffee mugs, and set mine back down without comment. "You don't have to do anything with what you find," he said eventually. "Knowing and acting on it are 2 different decisions. A man can know a thing and choose to let it sit for a while before he decides what it means." I didn't say anything to Emily about what I'd found. I wasn't entirely sure yet what it meant, and some old, worn-down part of me still didn't want to believe I'd been lied to on top of everything else that week. So I did the only other thing that made sense, which was to keep working. Walter and I spent the days after Christmas finishing out the winter's firewood deliveries, checking in on the elderly couple from the storm, on Frank, on Mrs. Gable, whose supply I'd personally made sure would last her clear through February. The absence of that record stayed with me through New Year's, quiet and unresolved, the way an unanswered question tends to when you've decided not to chase it any further, but haven't quite managed to set it down either. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd made my decision that night for reasons that had nothing to do with whether the flood was real or invented, whether her basement had actually taken on water or not. I still would have said no to driving my equipment across town to bail out a man who'd bought tickets for everyone but me. That much at least felt solid, regardless of what the records did or didn't show. It was nearly a week later, the 2nd of January, when Emily called again. again. Her voice was quieter this time, none of the panic from Christmas Eve and none of the earlier irritation either. Just tired. I owe you an apology, she said. For a lot of things, probably. But I wanted to tell you something first, and I don't really know how. I didn't say anything, just let her get to it in her own time. The night of the storm, she said. I need to tell you what actually happened at the house. Not the version I told you on the phone. My stomach went tight and still, the way it does right before you're handed something you already suspect but haven't had confirmed. His generator didn't fail, she said. There wasn't a burst pipe. I made that part up because I panicked, and I didn't know what else to say to get you to come help us. Then what actually happened? There was a long pause, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. He wasn't home, she finally said. He left the gala early, before midnight, before you even pulled that news van out of the ditch. He told my mom he had a work emergency, a client situation he had to handle personally. She believed him. I didn't, not entirely, because I saw a text come through on his phone earlier in the night before he left, and I saw enough of it to know it wasn't work. I sat very still in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, waiting. There's a woman, Emily said, someone he's been seeing since before Thanksgiving. I found out because his assistant, the actual work one, called the house looking for him around 1 in the morning asking where he was, because apparently a real client situation had come up and nobody could reach him. My mom was standing right there when the call came in. She's the one who figured out where he actually was, because the assistant let something slip about an address that wasn't anywhere near his office. And the basement, the pipes, all of that, none of it happened, Emily said, her voice cracking slightly. The power blinked but never fully went out at our place, not like it did across the rest of the county. I made up the flooding because I was scared and confused, and I didn't know how to explain what was actually going on. And calling you and asking you to come deal with a fake emergency felt easier than telling you the real one. I closed my eyes for a moment, the pieces settling into a shape I hadn't wanted them to take. Your mother knows now. She's known since that night, Emily said. She confronted him 3 days later once she had it confirmed from 2 separate people who'd seen his car parked outside that address more than once over the past month. He didn't even try to deny it very hard. I think some part of him wanted to get caught, honestly, the way he'd started being careless about it. Why didn't you tell me any of this on Christmas? Because I was ashamed, she said. Not of you, of myself. I lied to your face about a flood to get you to bail out a man who was busy being unfaithful to my mother while we were all supposedly one big family. And you were out there the whole night actually helping people who needed it, and I was inventing a crisis so you'd come rescue us from a lie. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside my kitchen window, the snow from that storm had mostly melted, leaving the yard patchy and brown, all the clean white of Christmas gone gray and ordinary again. The record search I did, I said finally. The utility outage report, the insurance claim, there wasn't one. I found that out before you called me tonight. You checked. Walter helped me. I wanted to know before I let myself believe anything either way. I wasn't trying to catch you in it. I just wanted the truth of it. And now you have it, Emily said quietly. Now I have it, I agreed. There was a long silence on the line, the kind I would have rushed to fill 4 days earlier with reassurance, whatever it took to close the gap and get back to feeling needed. I didn't rush to fill it this time. I just let it sit there, honest and a little cold, the way the air outside had been honest and cold every night I'd spent clearing roads with Walter. I don't expect you to fix this, Emily finally said. I think I just needed you to know the actual truth, since you spent that whole night out there being exactly who you actually are, and I spent it lying to cover for someone who wasn't. Your mother, I said. How is she? Furious, humiliated, filing for divorce, actually. Apparently there's a pattern with him going back further than any of us want to think about. I thought about the man in his tailored suits, his pristine car, his low, calculated voice. I thought about the tickets he'd bought for everyone but me, the family dinner meant to make him feel like family while he was quietly building an entire second life on the side. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Not for what I did that night. I'd do it again exactly the same way, but I'm sorry you had to carry that lie alone. I didn't think you'd believe the real story, she said. I'd made it pretty clear where you ranked. I understood the ranking, I said. I just didn't understand why. I wanted so badly for it to be a real family that I overlooked a lot about him that should have bothered me from the start. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over. What happens now? I don't know yet, Emily admitted. Mom's staying with her sister until the house situation gets sorted. I'm staying with a friend from work for a bit. Everything with him is unraveling faster than I expected it to once it started. You know where I am, I said. That hasn't changed. It was never going to change, regardless of what happened at that gala or in that basement that never actually flooded. I know, she said. And for the first time in longer than I could easily place, she sounded like she actually did know it. I think I forgot that for a while. We didn't resolve everything on that call, and I didn't expect we would. But when we finally said goodbye that night, there was something in her voice that hadn't been there on Christmas Eve. Something steadier, less like a woman managing optics and more like my daughter, finally, telling me the truth because it was the truth. I hung up the phone and sat alone in my kitchen for a long time afterward, listening to the house settle around me, thinking about Walter's dispatch logs and Mrs. Gable's firewood and a basement that had never actually flooded at all.